Your AFL Fantasy preseason is underway. Prices are out, positions locked in, and even a few new initiatives as well as an updated platform coming for AFL Fantasy players in 2026. But between now and when the platform opens in early January, coaches are going, well, what do I do? I'll tell you what you do. You go and start to get the work done by creating your predicted best 22 players for the upcoming season. It might help you with your trading cadence plans, with your starting squad structures, and it might just, if nothing else, pass the time for you. So I wanted to share with you my best 22 and who I think is going to be the predicted and the projected best options line upon line for the upcoming season, albeit it's the December edition. Kicking off my back line with maybe, I think it's the safest defensive premium this year. Whether or not it's the best to start is a whole nother conversation. But Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera, he was outstanding, especially in the back half of the 25 season, and one of the best scoring options last year outside of a Max Gawn. It was just a ripping pick. And if you didn't have him for many weeks from sort of round 11 onwards, you did find yourself playing catch up against ranked or league-based opponents. He was exceptional because from round 11 onwards, he goes at this average of 117.4. Just absolutely exceptional what he did. And he did start to get a little bit more attention as the season wore on. And yet, despite this, still found ways most weeks to score incredibly well. What I liked about Nasiah's game when he did start to get some of this attention, which I think is going to happen as he becomes more and more of a predominant midfielder for the Saints, is Ross Lyons still coached the team and moved the magnets around in such a way that Nasiah was still such a critical piece if and when he found himself getting some kind of negating attention from opposition midfielders. I remember in numerous games, they kick him behind the ball. He starts to take more kick-ins. He starts to become the outlet option where the opposition are like, well, if he's going to get his possessions kind of back behind the centre square or behind defensive 50 areas, okay, we're going to let him do it. For an AFL fantasy coach, we don't care where he gets the ball. We just care that he gets it. And I think he's going to get an absolute chunk of it. And he'll spend a lot of this preseason learning to deal with some of this attention. I really like Naz as a pick, and I think he's one of the safest defensive premiums when it comes to predicting who are going to be the best scoring options in 2026. In a similar vein, I'm really confident with this decision. Connor Rozee, I think he's going to be one of the best defenders yet again for us. Saw a role change last year, moving out of that inside midfield role to becoming a little bit more of a playmaker and a ball movement transition player coming out of defensive 50. And when you break down the stats, there were 12 games last year where two things correlated for him, where he A, had a kick in, and B, he attended less than 50% of those centre square opportunities, or the old school centre bounce attendances. We can't call them now. We're not bouncing the ball. But in those games where those two things happened, which was 12 of them last year, he averaged 105. That's top line premium mid territory. Now to get that as a defender is absolutely awesome. Now, the uncertainty of role under a new coaching regime in Josh Carr is a little bit more unknown. But if you're to believe kind of the innuendo and the conversations that have kind of leaked out of Port Adelaide over the last 6 months, it does seem to be that the narrative of kind of moved into this backline role, or this halfback playmaker role, was actually a Josh Carr initiative. So if that is the case, I can't see why one season he'd want that, the next season he'd take that out. I think we do need to see a little bit more about this preseason, how it evolves, what changes. But early talk is out of Port Adelaide is that is where he's going to be and has been training. And in addition to that, is that Josh Carr wants Port Adelaide to have a little bit more control on the ball. They felt a bit too kamikaze in their ball movement as a result, lost possession and got turnovers and goals out the back really easy. Josh Carr seemingly wants to negate that a little bit. And as a result, that could result for AFL fantasy coaches in a few easier marks possessions, a couple of plus sixes. And I think if that happens, then it could really see that 105 marker of a Connor Rosie potentially even elevate a little bit, which could be exciting. Regardless of if he's in an inside midfield role or off halfback, I think given what it takes to become a top line defender, he's going to be that. I'm happy to project him in that spot. Look, it probably feels a little bit predictable and boring, and I want to stay in that lane for you for at least one more, maybe two. Lachie Whitfield, look, the boy just scores AFL fantasy points for fun. That injury-plagued narrative over the last couple of years has just drifted away from being a reality into just some kind of legacy territory of information. What I like about Lachie is he just has these features about the way he scores well, is that he not only scores high end and top ceiling performances, he just doesn't dip bad scores for us. Like there's one game all last year that he goes under 80. And the one that he did, and I talk about an injury history, that's not true. It was the one game where he got injured last year. And that's where he was actually on track to go 80 plus too. So I just don't see him too much of a problem child for us here. I think he's a great pick. I mean, his scoring kind of ceiling did chip away a little bit with Lachie Ash starting to increase his market share, but Whitfield's the alpha playmaker of this defensive line, and he's the personification of scoring consistency. And while the ceiling's not as big as it has been, it's still pretty handy. So for me, I'm happy to put him in there. Last three, there is one that maybe is a stretch, but I don't feel like this early on in December we're going to see a massive amount of chaos in our top line defensive premiums. I think it might be in some other lines, but Jack Sinclair, like there are three things that are certain in life: death, taxes, and Jack Sinclair getting a low 100 average. He's now got 4 consecutive seasons where he's gone that average between 101 and 102. Like it's exceptional. And the move of Nazaya Wanganeen-Miller into more of a midfield role can and does, I think, leave him with a little bit more of a primary playmaker opportunity. Now there's not a huge heap of upside here, and there hasn't been around Jack for the last couple of years. But I just don't see any deviation. I see him getting the primary movement. There's a small uptick of when Nazaya was more in the midfield. His scoring got a little bit of a boost, but not like 110. I'm talking like 104, 105. So nothing chaotic, but if you just want to get a solid option, and politely, that's what I'm projecting him to continue to be, is just that 101, 102 defender. He'll get us at a nice price point during the year to jump on, and if the fixture's right, it might be the right spot. So I'm happy to put him in that spot. I think the next defender for me, again, probably staying pretty conservative early on. Don't worry, some chaotic calls are coming your way. Lachie Ash, for me, it was an outstanding year. He lifted his seasonal average by 23 points to become the first time in his career he goes to triple-digit average. 16 tons for 23 games is an outstanding conversion rate. I think the only alarming piece here for coaches, and probably the things that really is holding his back, is just those lack of ceiling games. Just 2 games last year over 120 plus. And there were a lot of games where big scores went begging. He often slowed in the third to fourth quarters of games. There were 9 games last year where he failed to average in the last quarter, where he failed to score 25 points or more. Now, I know it doesn't have to be a linear 25, 28, but it's interesting that when the game is on the line, that is probably more consistently his lowest performing quarter. There's even 2 of those 9 games where his scores were single digits. So probably that's the thing that's holding him back a little bit, is just that ability to, when he's got that 80 and 90 points at 3/4 time. I know it doesn't have to be linear growth, but those are the things that's really stopping him back from elevating his game to being a low 90s, early hundreds guy to being a 105 plus premium defender. I wouldn't start him under any circumstance in AFL Fantasy Classic, with the exception of a serious injury to the other Lachie in Whitfield in his team. But I think there's a few things that, while you might go, well, if a few things break against him, he goes back to a 90 guy, I'd say, yeah, that's true. But I also think if a few of those latter quarters break his way, all of a sudden we can talk about a 105, 110 guy. So I think he's going to be around the same sort of range. I'm happy to put him in that spot. And then maybe my first big, bold call of my projections. I think I went a bit Kiwi on you there. My first big, bold projection for defenders that are just going to absolutely pop is Colby McKercher. I'm bullish on what Colby's going to be for us this year. In his final 12 games of 2025, where he moved back into that playmaking role off halfback, no sign of a Harry Sheasel, who played more centre forward of the game. That's where he, and I'd argue North Melbourne, looked much more composed and much more prolific. During that stretch of 12 games, here he is going at an average of 94.6 and included 4 tons and 4 additional scores between 91 and 99. So 8 of those 12 games, 91 or above. That's positive in that spot for us. Look, I'm basing a lot of this kind of elevation of his game on the premise that I just don't see Caleb Daniel as really helping this North Melbourne side forward anymore. I never really understood it. I understand it even less now. But if I've got Colby as the primary creator and playmaker, and Caleb, if he's in the AFL side at all, is the support mechanism to Colby, not the other way around. So those are my top 6 defenders. Are they similar to yours or not? I'd love to know in the comments section what you think of it. Let's jump into the midfielders. There's some big name movements that sit in this spot. I think one of the best premium midfielders this year, in fact, I think he may just be the best, is Errol Goulden. He had a pretty serious ankle injury last year, required some surgery, and as a result, just plays 10 games last year. And even off a limited runway, we still got to see that the way he compiles his AFL fantasy points is absolutely prolific. And he is made for the modern game, where he can win the ball on the inside and become a stoppage scorer. But he also, and most importantly, gets the ball out in transition outside of traffic. And he gets them both done too. To be an absolute elite scoring midfielder, you have to have both components of your game, and he has that. Yes, he's a little bit more favourable on the transition side, but he's still absolutely elite through there. He wins plenty of his own ball at stoppages, and then, like I said, in transition, he gets out and about and gets it done as well. Despite having a limited number of games last year, still 4 tons last year, and a great conversion of tons to 120 plus territories. That's where our VC and C scores, captaincy and vice captaincy, can really poppy. 3 of those 4 tons go 120 plus. So that's really helpful for us. And I think with a full preseason, and also importantly, let's not discount the fact it was the first year that Dean Cox got to coach the side. It was off limited runway of a preseason to it, at least publicly. I could absolutely see him, even if he's spending a little more time out on the wing, they just want to get the ball in his hands. I can really see a 110 plus season coming back for Errol Goulden. I think he may just be one of the top scoring premium midfielders, if not the top scoring premium midfielder this coming season. It's hard to go against Jordan Dawson, isn't it? He finished the 2025 AFL Fantasy season with 4th best for total points, 6th best for average, 15 tons last year, and 9 of them over 120 plus score. And just the once did he drop that scoring under 80. So great consistency, great ceiling, and he's just not going to hurt you with a poor scoring floor as well. It's undoubtedly obvious to everyone, let alone those inside the Crom 4 walls, that Dawson needs some more support. And while they didn't fix that up at the trade or the draft period, some would hesitate that means bad news for Dawson because you shut him down, you shut them down. I would suggest and propose that there's some other options that can come through there. Rankin is one of those. If Draper can get himself fit this preseason, I think he's an outlet. Rochelle is another, let alone some other guys that sits through there that haven't had a heap of opportunity. So yes, it's not awesome. Here comes Christian Petrarca, but it's far from a dangerous thing. What I like about Dawson, regardless of who supports him in this inside midfield and this midfield combination, he's just got a great rounded game, doesn't he? Takes aerial marks for fun, wins the contested ball, gets out and about and wins the ball through transition, drifts behind the ball, sets up the play when it's needed to, goes forward, takes big marks, kicks goals, like really valuable wherever he's needed. And I think that's what I like about him as a premium midfielder for us. Now, he's not going to give us the value that he did last year as a starter, but you just know that if the game's on the line, Dawson's going to put himself in that position, and the Crows want him in that position where he is still arguably their most important player because he can do it all. There's no value there, but I still really, really like it. My next premium midfielder I think is going to be another ripping option for us is a guy that's got the highest seasonal average at the moment, Bailey Smith. A phenomenal debut season at Geelong. He ended with the highest average in AFL Fantasy, that 116.3. And despite just playing 20 of 23 available games, So yeah, check this out. He still finishes 13th in AFL Fantasy. 3 games skinny of many others at the top. 13th for total points. This guy was just scoring points for fun. 16 tons, just the one game where he dips under 80. Outstanding result coming off an ACL. He's just built for fantasy. Like, he's got that high work rate about him, plenty of uncontested possessions and marks. And with Max Holmes elevating himself to being the arguably more dangerous of the playmakers, it just means that if anything's going to happen, he's going to be like, yeah, if you want to win the ball, D50, you want to get that easy, uncontested ball, no problem. And again, for AFL fantasy coaches, we don't care which quadrant or component of the ground you get the ball. And just Max is the more damaging, and Bailey is arguably the hardest working midfielder in the game right now. So I just like it as a prospect, as an option. It's nothing amazing or sexy about it, but I just like it as a pick. And Nick Dacos, wow, another outstanding year last year. Ranked 6th for total points in AFL Fantasy last year. Top 4 amongst all midfielders for average last year. 13 tons, 10 120-plus scores last year. This is outstanding. And he continues to be the person that Collingwood go to for the ball all the time. He's still working on that ability to break the tag, but with another preseason of work, I'm confident that he'll continue again to evolve and grow his game. I just like watching Nick Dacos play. He's got a harder edge about him than people realise. He can take a contested mark, gets the defensive stuff done when it's needed, but it's really his work rate and his teammates' ability to find him when he works into space that really makes him such a great fantasy prospect. Next premium midfielder, no unfamiliar names, but Zach Butters could just have a career season this coming year. Now, on the surface, a few of you might be going, you're reaching, MJ. But I'm pretty confident in this one. He missed a big chunk of the year last year due to a knee injury in February. And we saw an average drop after a couple of years of consecutive hundreds. He drops down to a 98. So I know it doesn't look good on the surface, but in reality, you've always got to look for why and look under the surface of why something has happened, both better or worse, to be able to see what is really under the surface here. And really, what's under the surface is Oisin Mullen. The Geelong tagger absolutely got under the skin and squashed the scoring of Zach Butters on 2 separate occasions where he got a 46 and a 34 in those 2 matchups. And by the way, they are not injury impacted games. So absolutely squashed him, and a big reason why his average dropped under 100. Because when you look at the average outside of those 2 games, now I'm not trying to justify it because that's what he scored, and Mullen absolutely got him. But in the other 18 games that he played last year, he goes at an average of 106.5. For reference point, only 5 other midfielders averaged more than that 106.5 in 2025. So for me, I'm like, okay, he's right in this mix here. Mullen's not in the first few months of the year too. So, by the way, just quietly, one of the easiest starting squad picks for me when the format does open in January, because the first 4 weeks of the year, my memory might be wrong here, but I think they got the first 4 games of the 4 lowest teams on the AFL ladder from last year. So, yeah, Porter starting 4-0, and Zach, who might be signing a contract with a new AFL club in the off-season next year. Oh, yeah, it's going to be fun owning him to start the year. My next primo mid that I'm pretty bullish on, and I think everybody would be very understandable to, is Marcus Bontempelli. It was just the second time in his AFL fantasy career that his average was 110 or higher. And much like Zach, an injury in the preseason kind of stunted his ability to get the full year. He didn't play as many games as Zach, though, just the 18. But still, Marcus was awesome. Maybe not in the 1 or 2 games straight after the bye when most people went and got him last year, but he was awesome. The Bulldogs are consistently one of the highest AFL fantasy scoring sides, and the success or failure of this Bulldogs team continues to hinge and hang around Marcus's ability to impact a game. 4 of his last 5 seasons, he's gone on an average of 107 or above. And at 30, he ain't fallen out of his prime anytime soon. I'm backing him to get it done. He is the greatest Western Bulldog already in his career. I've never, and I don't think there is a greater Footscray or Western Bulldog player ever, let alone from a fantasy perspective. This kid is an absolute star, and he's no longer a kid because he's turning 30. So, yeah, brilliant, isn't he? Let's go a little more. This one's different, but I think you've got to hold the narrative thought for me here. Injuries are never great, but they always do create an opportunity. The problem here, I should tell you the name, Jai Caldwell. I think he's going to be a top 8 mid this year. It's the second season in a row, and unfortunately it's continued narrative of what happened early days at GWS, but injuries are starting to impact his ability to break out to the top end of what he could be. But last year, from the 11 games he did play, he goes at an average of 103.6. So still good. But again, got to look underneath the history, underneath the data to see if there's a little more to it. There were 8 games last year that he had a centre square attendance, the old CBA, of 60% or higher. And in those games, he goes at an average of 116.5. That's above what Bailey Smith's is, who is the highest averaging player in AFL Fantasy. It is a limited run, and it does take a lot of injuries to get you there. But I like Jai Caldwell. I just think he's as rounded a score as you can get. Got a really nice tackle baseline. Isn't that player that you go and tag because you've got a Zach Merritt there? Because he's a bit more of an untraditional kick. He's not a bad kick by any means, but he's not elite either. A nice kick to handball ratio, takes the marks, good tackle baseline, can get forward and impact the game as well. I just like it. And if anyone's getting negative attention in this Essendon side from an opposition team, it is still Zach Merritt without any question. Even if he's not primary in the midfield, they're just going to shut him down. I'm happy to put Jai in this spot. And then my last one, Andrew Brayshaw. We've got to talk about him. He is who I think is still going to maintain that. Now, I'm not going to lie. In the last few years, his scoring trajectory in AFL Fantasy is heading in a direction I'm not a huge fan of. In 2022, he averages 112, and every year since, he's actually regressed until last year. He comes at this average of 101. So not the trend we want to see. But despite the decreasing average trajectory here, he hasn't missed a game in 4 years, and he's ranked 14th, 7th, and 1st overall for total points. So his availability is one of the keys that keeps him consistently at the top end of the scoring premium midfield territory. Now, he did increase his market share last year, so that's positive, and he does have that great durability. I'm interested to see exactly what the next evolution of Fremantle's midfield and game style is. Hayden Young comes back in that side. I don't think that's going to chop him out too hard. I think it's probably just more going to be those 3rd, 4th options that were there last year start to slide out of that rotation a bit, because we know what Andrew is. He is one of the hardest working midfielders in the game, defensively and offensively. That is his secret weapon, is his work rate. I still am going to back him in there. I don't think he's going to be an absolute must start the year. He had a slow back end of the year, but he had an absolute ripping kind of middle half of the year was exceptional. So what do you believe is a truer narrative? Is it once the Dockers got going, he started to slow a little bit? Is it actually that kind of middle chunk of the year where the Dockers were starting and stopping, but he was pumping out that 110 territory? I'd love to know, but I just think his availability, his consistency, is really just elite work rate. I'm happy to put him in that spot, in that 8th midfield spot. You could throw others. You could throw Dunkley in there. You could throw Rowell in there. You could throw Anderson in there. You could throw a bunch of other names, Ashcroft, Josh Kelly. No, I'm joking, but I had to get him in. But yeah, it's going to be a bit clogged in sort of that 6, 7, 8 options lined up. That's for sure. Do you want to hit the rucks? It might feel controversial. I don't have Tim English as a top 2 ruck. I do have Max Gawn. I'm sure we'll talk about as the preseason goes on, the new ruck rules and what that means and how that hurts scoring. But let's talk about Max for a second. Personal best AFL Fantasy average from the captain. 4th time in his career, goes over that 110 marker. And his capacity to turn triple-digit scores into 120 plus ones is absolutely exceptional. 17 tons last year, 10 of those 120 plus scores. He offers zero value. There is no upside to start him at all. Yes, because of his price point, but also in addition. Are you really wanting to pay this much money on a premium ruck with some uncertainty of almost a blind faith leap, not knowing what these ruck rule adjustments will or won't do to scoring? Yeah. Throw in the fact he's got a really challenging early fixture, but I'm not going there. That said, since 2018, Max has been the best scoring ruck in the game. And even more responsibility lands on him with no Oliver, no Petrarca. So if they're winning games, he is the central piece of that without exception. So if he has a great game, Melbourne are in the game. And they won't out of as many games as you might have thought. Yeah, they're clearly gone a bit younger in some spots. I know Jack Steele comes in, might mitigate some of the loss of an Oliver and or Petrarca. I just think he's going to be right around the mix of what he's been doing, but I just couldn't start him under any circumstance. The other one that I want to talk in there, if I don't have English, it needed to be either one of Grundy or Cherry. And I'm going for Tristan Cherry. Potentially different to others. Like I said, others might put an English in, which I totally would get and see that he's less hit out and stoppage dependent of scoring, which is where some of those ruck rules have adjusted, or a Grundy who was fire in the back 3 months of the year. But I just like it. I feel like I can trust the scoring build of Tristan a little bit more. A nice baseline on tackles, which is really important. Nice baseline on hit outs around the ground, and does still get involved in some work. Maybe not as much as English or Gawn, but still gets involved. But the conversation about what this scoring looks like is interesting to me. Is he closer to his breakout year of 2024, where he was that 114, or his last year's 105, a little bit closer to the narrative? Look, personally, I look at last year and I see a bunch of aberration games, both bad and good, that actually would think, I think he's closer to 114 than a 105. You throw that alongside the fact he's got an outstanding ruck run for the opening 2 months of the year. So any potential loss, let's forecast some loss with the ruck rules that might come his way, I think could be gained with just a really favourable run of fixtures early on. So I'm happy to back him in. Those are my top 2 rucks. You want to hit the forward line? All right, let's do it. Let's stay in the same team. I think a unanimous number 1 forward option that people will be projecting this year. And I get why it's pretty unanimous. Harry Sheezel. Of all these player predictions, this is probably the most universal that everybody would have in every projected team. It's just, again, exceptional. Coming off the back of another consecutive 100-plus season, he's settling into this mid-forward role really nicely after starting that career across halfback. And there was 11 games last year where he attended a minimum of 30% of centre squares. And in those games where he's at that starting midfield at ball up or bounces that we used to have, or throw up, or whatever it's now known as, in those games where he has the minimum of 30%, and he didn't have a kick in, important caveat, he averages 116. Now the opponents matter in this game, absolutely. But there are 11 games that this happened where he didn't have a kick in, and he has a minimum of 30% centre square attendance, and he goes 116. People are saying he doesn't have any value and they might not start him. I would say maybe there is a little bit of value, but also maybe you've got so much value everywhere else you could just spend the salary cap on him anyway. We'll wait and see. We'll talk about that. I just think, while he's not going to come cheap, he looms as one of, if not the number 1, an absolute lock for a podium spot of a top 3 forward. I'm really, really happy to put him in this spot. Probably comes as no surprise to Sam Flanders is my number 2 selection. He moved clubs from the Suns to the Saints for one primary reason. He wanted more inside midfield opportunities. It was the promise that he's left for, and that is going to be fulfilled under Ross Lyon. The Saints have lost a fair bit through that midfield. Jack Steele is out, and I think they're going to start to move some other players out of that mix as well, as they kind of revolutionise in and around a Nasiah Wanganeen-Millera. Like, just before we get back to Sam's fantasy numbers, think about it. Last year, their midfield was really one-paced. St Kilda for a lot of the year. It was Steele. It was McRae. It was Windhager. Really, the only dynamic difference that was in there was a bit of Sinclair and a little bit of Nasiah, a little bit of Garcia. Again, doesn't offer anything elite from a skill set, but defensively and work rate, okay, he's there. Or now you start to think Filippo is kind of that strike power inside mid option, that's first touch possession player. Flanders is a bit more of the in and out type of midfielder, and Nasiah as that real, just absolute exquisite user that can win it on the inside too. Like that trio, and then being supported by a bunch of others, whether it be the Windhager, whether it be the Garcias, whoever you think it is, Boxall. Oh, I just think this midfield mix, it looks drastically different. And I think it's going to have a greater shape about it and a greater efficiency about it as a result. I think that thought about what Flanders could be, though, we do need to put a level of temperance on this. Is that a word? Let's go with it. I just know we sometimes look at a player's previous average and just fall in love with it and tell ourselves, well, that's what they'll be. We look at his 2024 average of 107.8 and go, well, that's what he is. That's what he'll be. And he won't, based on that average. He might, based on what he could be, but it's not because he averaged that, because he did that playing as the playmaker and as the distribution outlet from the Suns as a halfback option. So it's not an apples for apples illustration point. I think a better reflection of what he could be is when we look at the totality of the last 3 seasons and we start to put some filters on it, that we can start to see a little bit of difference. So if we make the filter baseline over the last 3 years, where Sam attends 30% of centre square moments. So 30% of times the ball is bounced or thrown up after a goal or at the start of a quarter. What did he score? Well, from those 19 games that he fits in that filtering, he goes at an average of 98.8. Now, he's priced around that 60s range, so it's exceptional value, and you're starting him anyway, but I think we should just bring our expectation of what he could be down into the high 90s, and then let's get pleasantly surprised if he can bring that up into that 107 territory that he did when he was playing off halfback at the Suns, rather than making it he's going to be a top 5 player in the game. He could still be, but let's not trick ourselves and be disappointed with a high 90s average, right? In at number 3, I'm backing back Adam Treloar. Last year's pain is a new year's gain, and I think that's how you should be viewing it, because he's coming off the back of consecutive seasons prior to this injury-impacted one where he's gone 100 plus. He ended the season playing just the 4 games last year. It's the first time since his debut season in 2012 that he didn't dish up a ton. So absolute stop-start year from Adam for a bunch of different things, but I think we can take some really important things out of this. One, he played through the VFL finals and ultimately winning that premiership and looked strong and powerful. And every single track watcher that has gone down to Whitten Oval just comments that his power is back and his speed has not been lost. So that's important for us. Now, the discount on his price point is not as big as you might have liked because of how AFL Fantasy work the game. So I don't see a heap of value upside to jump in as a starter, but I just think he's closer to that sort of 100 averaging guy. And really last year was an unfortunate blip on him, knocking the narrative over that he had an injury history about him. I really love Adam as a player. I think it's another comeback year for him, and I'm happy to put him in that spot. Keziah Pickett is the next forward I'm happy to throw in this spot. He had a breakout year and he elevated his average by over 20 points up to an 87.3. He was exceptional. It netted him 7 scores over 100 plus. That was a personal best result, including a career high score of 126. And he really cemented that move into that center square midfield role by attending 69% of center square moments. So this is positive. Big changes come. However, lots has changed at Melbourne in the off-season, hasn't it? Oliver's out, Petrarca's out, and while you might be like, well, that's great because he's just locked in. It's a new coach in Stephen King. So we have to just give some space here to maybe think that under a new coaching ecosystem, they believe, and he believes, that Koscielny is his most impactful inside forward 50. And while that could be the case, I think there's enough other elements that sit inside this Melbourne list that while they won't want to lose Cossie's impact inside forward 50, I think you can build a case that his greatest impact, not only on the game, but for the opportunity for Melbourne to win, is for him to be more inside midfield, playing through that centre square rather than just isolating him deep inside forward 50. Colton Tholstrup, I think, is a really smart player and is really growing in his craft. And then they've drafted a Latrell Pickett, who's a really damaging, promising medium forward type that I think they're going to give him some games nice and early on. I'm not forecasting a massive bump of that midfield role. I still think they want him sort of 1 in 3 of those moments inside forward 50. And he might just start the game a little bit like Dusty did in kind of the latter part of his year. We saw DeGoey when he's been at his most powerful and even an Isaac Rankin no, we want you to win the ball at that ball up moment. But then we want you to go forward and create this isolation and get a great matchup against a defender or a midfielder that's playing in defense, or be able to work some management with, those handover moments. I think that could be a more likely scenario, that he has a high-ish centre square attendance, but still a good, strong presence inside forward 50. Just 2 more players to go on the list. And I've already mentioned one of them, Isaac Rankin. Now, he is going to miss the start of the year. So an AFL imposed sanction is going to cost him the start. So you're not starting him in your classic team. But last year was his first year where the Crows used him with greater intent in the midfield. Now, I know the centre square numbers aren't chaotically different, but there's greater intent. And I look at this club and this off-season, and I think, where is Isaac's greatest impact? I think the arrival of Calamar Chi, who's going to be utilised between the forward and the wing position, that is where he will play. I think it just allows for a little bit more flexibility for the Crows in terms of how they move their squad around, because Berry, Saligo, Peatling, Dawson, there's outside of Dawson as that more strike midfielder. I think Peatling, I'm not sure if he's got the tank yet still in his body to do a full preseason there. But also I know they don't want to lose his ability to impact forward of the ball too. I just look at them like they just need something dynamic through the midfield. And Saligo's not dynamic. Berry's not dynamic. Even if Curtin moves in there, he's not dynamic. And so I see at Isaac Rankin getting a little bit more opportunity through there. Over the first 9 games of the 2025 season, he averaged 98.6. That's 11 points per game ahead of his seasonal average. And if that becomes the baseline, and again, his centre square attendances were higher in the front half of the year, I think if that happens, even with him missing to start the year, he becomes a real promising option to become one of our top line premium forwards for us. So I'm happy to back Isaac in. And then maybe this is because the forwards aren't great. I know some, like a Jeremy Cameron or a Brian Myers or a Sean Manor or any Geelong option that rolls through there. Some are loving what Riley Thilthorpe could be. Jordan DeGoey could jump up. I honestly think we'll probably get a dual position player at that sort of post round 5 bye that will absolutely slide in this spot. We always get at least 1, 2, 3 that pop through. We got, Petrarca and Warner, for example, just of this season gone, that were top line options for us. I like Dylan Moore. I really just like Dylan Moore. Maybe controversial, but I think there's a little bit of upside there. I know the average of 81.8 doesn't look, doesn't look great when it's compared to the last couple of seasons, but there's a bit that's changed at Hawthorn. The departure of Warple has meant that they thought and hoped it would be balanced out by the arrival of Zach Merritt, which that didn't eventuate. And yeah, okay, there might be a bit of Nick Watson that rolls through there. There might be a bit of Connor McDonald that rolls through there. There might be a little bit of Jack Dalton that gets some opportunity, or a Cam McKenzie. I think all these things are possible. And as a result of that, so I'm not suggesting Dylan's going to pick that up, although that could very well be the case and did happen at a few times last year. I think if that is the case, then there's some market share of the ball forward of centre for Hawthorn that could just slide back a little bit more to Dylan. Because I look at this year last year, and no shade on a Jack Gunston, but he ain't doing that again. He was out of the team at the start of the year. He was heading towards retirement. He is not repeating that good of a season again. You just don't do that at his age. The statistical anomaly of that is awesome to have watched, but let's not bank on that. And so this is my premise theory of why I think Moore could grow, is if they're going to use some of their supporting small forward craft, kids and group, so your Watson and your Ginnivan, McDonald, to play a little bit or pick up a little bit more of the ball through centre square opportunities. And I'm backing on some regression of ball for a Jack Gunston, specifically around goals. I can just see Dylan creeping back up towards that 90. And I don't think he's going to be that great. I think he's going to be good. But I don't love a lot of forwards this year, politely. Outside of Sheasel and Flanders, I don't really love any of these options. So thank goodness we're going to get a ton of value rolling through this spot. And so by the time the first DPPs or TPPs could come our way, yep, triple position players are a thing now in AFL Fantasy. I'm just hoping we get some better options, and we'll still have some cash cows and some breakout options and money runners that we can kind of hit through there. I'm not loving the forward line this year, hence why Dylan Moore makes the cut. He's been really reliable as a 90s guy. It was certainly a down season. I'm backing him to get back there again, whether it's enough to be a top 6 by the end of the year. I think it's going to be based on the names we've got. But do you agree or disagree? Who do you think are going to be the best players across every single line for AFL Fantasy in 2026? I'd love to know. If you're watching this on YouTube, but why don't you comment below? Let me see your best 22. I cannot wait to see it. Hey, make sure if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure you do so. We got episodes dropping all the time. We're about to drop if you play Supercoach. My team reveal for that format is about to come out in the next couple of days when the team picker opens on the 17th. So it might already be open if you're watching this a little bit later on. I'll also give you my projected best 23s for Supercoach. There's some breakout options coming, and that's all before January 1 kicks off with the 50 most relevant. A player a day is coming to the channel from January 1. You don't want to miss that series. Make sure you like this video. Comment below too who your best 22 are. I cannot wait to see who you name, and we'll be back with you on the channel real soon talking AFL Fantasy, Supercoach, and Keeper as we start to really gear up for the 2026 Fantasy Footy preseason.